his sacred zone. This was his zone. 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 His sacred zone.
Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Algiers record. It's self-titled. Algiers, Atlanta, Georgia band, recent MATADOR Records signees, and this is their debut full-length LP. And going into this LP, I didn't really know that much about them outside of that I really liked the teaser tracks. The band was dropping Blood, Black Eunuch, But She Was Not Flying. Tracks that featured a strangely satisfying mix of post-punk, industrial, just a touch of maybe noise rock and goth rock, as well as blues music and gospel too. All over this LP there are drum machines, very shrill reverb, cutting guitars, warm bass, and vocals that are kind of rough around the edges and freakish, but also have like a very soulful quality to them, or sort of an old Southern Baptist choral group charm. These seemingly different worlds are combined on this record. Algiers essentially finds a lot of, or really makes a lot of fantastic creative common ground between these genres, and the results are pretty riveting and chilling. For some, I guess, modern comparisons, you might dig this record if you're into Ice Age, or maybe Savages, or maybe even a little bit of Willis Earl Beal if you love his just really over-the-top, very pronounced bluesy vocal style. I think you're going to get down with the singing here. But as far as older comparisons, people who might be into Screamin' Jay Hawkins, or a little bit of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Bauhaus, Tom Waits, Leadbelly, and Joy Division, I think might find some interesting things in this record too. So going into this LP, I already knew it had great singles, and so the question after that, once it's released, is does the album deliver? And the answer to that is yes, 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 yes! Frontman Franklin James Fisher's hollers and howls match the kind of chaotic and cavernous and tortured production on this record perfectly. There are a few moments on this LP, especially on the more toned down tracks, where his gospel-influenced singing style feels like just a little bit of a put-on, which might have something to do with the fact that his singing is kind of rough around the edges, but kind of in a self-aware punk way. Still though, even the softer and subtler tracks in the track listing here, like Blood and Games, bring some incredibly dark and disturbing lyrics, some of which sort of reflect on the current state of racism and violence in society today. I mean, really sort of observing what's been going on, in places like Ferguson as well as Baltimore. There are a few places I read where Algiers have kind of billed themselves as a bit of a protest band. And in a sense, they do live up to that label. I also love the song And When You Fall in the track listing here, with the swirls of echo all over this track, the fiery vocals, the noisy guitars, and the drum machine. This track sounds like heaven and hell at the same time. Or the song Iron Utility Pretext, which is maybe one of the stranger tracks in the track listing here, instrumentally, because it has this busy, bustling drum machine that sounds like it's straight out of the late 80s, early 90s, like it's supposed to be backing some EBM music, electric body music, not EDM, EBM. And there's this really, really familiar synth hit that pops up in the song repeatedly that you might also remember a similar synth hit, or maybe the same synth hit from Africa Bambaataa and the Soul Sonic Forces, Planet Rock. Seems like a pretty conscious reference. And the song Old Girl, I never thought post-punk and soul music could be fused so wonderfully in 2015. And the song Black Eunuch is one of the more aggressive tracks in the track listing here, and has some of the most detailed production. Just new little bits of instrumentation are constantly popping in and popping out. There's some strange hard panning of some of this instrumentation in the left channel and the right channel. It's just a really, I guess, overwhelming track as far as the writing and just the way the instrumentation is assembled. And even with all this detail and all this studio trickery, the raw percussion and the hand claps and the hollering vocals just feels really lo-fi and in the moment and organic. And the track But She Was Not Flying is a highlight for me because of sort of what I mentioned earlier, of the politically charged or socially aware lyrics littered all over this album that are most definitely worth reading into. I think the one downside of this LP is that the intro track seems to kind of just, I guess, drag on a little too long, and it has a bit of an unsatisfying ending to it. And the untitled closer just kind of seems like a long-winded sample of another song. I feel like the band, while it is a pretty track, I just feel like the band could have ended the record just a little more strongly. But still, as far as music in this style, and as far as post-punk, I guess I'm going to say, this is one of the most interesting breakout bands in a while. But simply calling them a post-punk group would be a bit of a disservice because I've never quite heard any band in this style fuse these genres together and do it so well. This LP is great, loving it back to front for the most part, but I still think, Algiers has some hidden potential that they're not fully exposing to us that I think might come out in future records, and I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on this thing. Tran? Zishin, if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Algiers, forever.